Welcome to another edition of Force Talk. I am Mike, created to excel James, and with me I have
Whitney,
Gina,
Ashley.
And today we're just continuing to review Bishop's message. He's teaching on a series on the little foxes, and today's title was Catch the Little Foxes Before It's Too Late. We just want to review some things that stood out. So who's going to go first?
I'll go first. One thing that stood out to me is that the things that I do against God not only affect my children, but when they show up in the subsequent generations, that they're like 10 times worse. The things that David did, he committed adultery with Bathsheba. It showed up in his children and in his children's children. Like his sons died, his son raped his daughter, just horrible, horrible things. And we don't realize that, the things that we think are little when they show up in the following generations are a lot worse. So that really stood out to me.
Yeah, it was really interesting that David had these two things. Murder, although bad, a murder and committing adultery, but what his children put up with was so much worse than that. He had to see that his son raped his daughter and sons being killed. It was just so much from those two things that maybe he thought were done, it was over with. That was really awesome point to me.
And another thing I'll say is that, we have these little sins and we realize that they're wrong, most of the time. But it's not about us. Like, we have to learn how to not be selfish. This is about God. This is about being able to just interact with others and make this world a better place.
What really stood out to me was how it can affect my children. Nobody wants their children to be ruined or harmed. Everybody loves their children. And that stood out to me, as well as the solution to this problem of generational curses. It brings me joy to know that I can take control of it over it by giving it to God and just letting Him be God and letting Him take control over my life. And that's what I got out of it.
Yeah, and it was a good point that, at one point Bishop was pretty much saying, is it worth your children, these little foxes that are continuing to destroy our lives? Is it worth your children going through something that you did maybe 20, 30 years earlier?
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember what you said about just how we can overcome these things through Jesus and how, His Spirit conquers all these other spirits with the generational curses, and, that we're not left without hope, that we can just, confess those things to Him, and, He, through the power of His Spirit, can make it right with our children.
Yeah, because I couldn't help but think about, some of the patterns in my family, and now it's like, okay, well, I don't really have to spend so much time worrying about it. I can just be free. I can choose the direction that I want my family to go in now.
I agree with that because, sitting, listening to the sermon, and God was speaking to me, and He was like bringing, my attention to everything that I have, all of my little foxes, and it's not fair that your children should have to go through that, because I have some things, that I inherited from my parents that I feel like is not fair because I didn't ask for it. So I don't want my children to go through that, and I do want to serve God, and I don't want to do anything on my own.
Yeah, and like you said, with it being almost unfair, it's one of those things where Bishop mentioned that, once you planted that seed, you can't take it back, and a man reaps what he sows, and it can be years down the road, You may think that ground is not fertile for that seed that you planted, but it will come back. But a good thing that we heard was that we can stop that, that generational spirit can end with us, by confessing that little fox, that sin that continually just torments us. We can stop it by confessing that and giving it to God. Was there anything else that stood out to anyone?
I will say that, even though the stuff that God, how He comes back at us, it does seem kind of extreme, but at the same time, He does it because He cares. Like, He just wants us to be careful.
He's just like a loving father. Like, He disciplines us, and he's just. He's a just God. And really, to think about it, God, He spoils us, like, at the same time. Like, we do all these things, and His grace just is sufficient, and He just keeps giving and giving and giving, even though we make mistakes. But He still punishes us to teach us, though, not to harm us, but to teach us.
So true.
Yeah, so as you can see, these this series is awesome. We're getting so much from these messages, so something you don't want to miss. Please join us again next week for another edition of Force Talk.